and going forward. Some of these I've listed here. There are more. I'm sure many of you will have other ideas. One is the importance of a holistic view of the PFM system, really going back to that graph or that chart I had early on of looking at the whole system. There are some tools that have emerged recently, one in particular, the Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability Assessment, PIFA assessment, which looks at, it's 28 performance indicators of a country's public finance system, looking across the whole spectrum of areas from that graph. And having something like that is a very valuable tool for trying to identify where is the weakest link. Rather than rushing in with, well, you must have a medium-term expenditure framework, let's look at what the weakest link is, share that with the authorities, and have them also participate in the debate of what do they need most to improve the management of their public finance system. Issues remain about the sequencing, the proper sequencing of reforms. Based on some of the work that I'm doing now and some of this data and other information, there's a certain sequence that may make sense, and there are certain types of issues that will be revisited again and again. One is in budget classification. Frequently, recommendations will be made that a budget classification, if a country is going to adopt it, it needs to be soup to nuts classification. It should have economic, functional, program, administrative, and many other types of classification that you might think of. Well, I don't think that's necessary. I don't think it's appropriate. I think it confuses countries. If a country is ready for strategic allocation, we can help them with a functional classification. In addition to their economic and administrative, they can handle that. They can use that. Understanding that in 5 or 10 years they're going to upgrade their IFMIS system anyway, they're going to have new computer systems probably, they can update their classification as well at that stage. They don't need to do everything at once. Right? Reform is an ongoing long-term effort. It's not, you don't have just one bite of the apple. Limiting the adverse impact of some of the supply push and the transplantation of advanced reforms to some of these weak environments. I think in some countries, Ghana, I recall, the World Bank is paying more to remove the agencies they created than they did to create the agencies. There were problems with the agencies in terms of accountability, transparency, reporting, financial reporting, all of these basic issues. So again, the environment, and was that the right solution to the issues Ghana was facing at the time? I would say not. That was a reform that they didn't need to undertake at that time to achieve what they were worried about, which was more macro-fiscal. Realistic time horizons. This is something that's been coming out a lot of the work, and it frustrates certainly the boards of the bank and the fund because they would like to see quick action, quick reforms. They expect countries to move from wherever they are to look like New Zealand in 3 years or 5 years, whatever the lending window is. And based on the work that we've done with indicators, we've seen pretty clearly that, and we just reconfirmed this with some work that was published earlier this year, and is on our blog, which is on the HIPIC expenditure tracking. On average, countries are improving about 3% a year against a set of benchmarks. That's fine, and will build up. You'll see quantum leaps over 5 or 10 years, but you're not necessarily going to see it year to year. So getting into these reforms for the long haul, I think, is one of the critical issues, and having a realistic time horizon. Ownership, I've talked a little bit about that, but I think allowing the country to be in the center of determining what is the biggest issue their Minister of Finance faces in managing day to day and helping them solve that has far greater traction than going into the country and trying to convince them that what they really need is a medium-term expenditure framework. Heresy in some cases, but I think it's the right approach to do. And then right-sizing the reforms and the measures. I mean, we know enough about public finance, we know enough about different options for introducing even performance information into a budget process, that we can go into small countries in weak environments and even start them on that road if they're really interested and they want to do it, without going to do full program budgeting with cascading performance measures. One size should not be fitting all. So I think there's some more challenge to be done in the field on trying to right-size reforms and get them customized to the country. That is the end of the presentation, but I'd be very happy to take any questions or discuss income in the country with which to repay the loan. Right? So, I mean, I think there is a bit of a truth in lending, if you will, that should be advanced in some of these areas. And I think it's the right of countries to certainly demand that, to say, look, what are the downsides? What are the risks that I won't be able to generate the income from these reforms? And what are the critical dimensions? And if there are large critical dimensions that are not being addressed, that's a fair question. Meet us halfway. There has been some movement. I mean, DFID in particular has been able to finance in some countries topping up of salaries to retain workers. I think the bank has experimented with that in some countries. I don't think it was Sierra Leone, but I think in Liberia they may have experimented with that. So there may be some potential, but those are the right questions to ask. It's an excellent question. How did we get into this mess? That's a long story in itself. Another topic, I mean, one, it's a bit of a failure of knowledge management of institutions to really gather the knowledge and what we understand about public finance and share it. I think part of it was also that we didn't have tools to be able to track progress and understand better what's working and what's not. I think PIFA gives us that, and we'll be able to do more learning of what works in what environments than we had in the past. I think some of it has been, you get these waves of consultants from various countries. Not to pick on anybody, it could be the US suddenly downsizes OMB, and you have 50 people who are suddenly going around the world advocating a particular way of doing business.
Creating OMB?
Creating OMB around the world. That's happened in some countries. Or creating congressional budget offices in parliamentary systems, and you scratch your head and think, how's that going to work? But these are things that are happening. And part of it is, I think, a knowledge management issue. Part of it is the need for communities of practice like ICGFM and internet-based resources to share some of these experiences and to challenge, to question. I mean, these common beliefs are important. We have to do a much better job at learning. And I think at the core of PIFA is really not the indicator set. It's an approach to doing business, which is being enshrined in the Paris Declaration on Aid Effectiveness a couple of years ago, and it's going to the Accra High-Level Forum on Aid Effectiveness later this year in September, which is really 3 pillars. Country leadership of the reform agenda and PFM reforms. Donor coordination around that country agenda. Don't come in every donor and say, look, I'll do IFMIS and you do MTEF and whatever your specialty is. That doesn't work. And the third is some common tool for measuring progress over time. And with that framework, I think we'll see much more progress. And those lessons were, that 3-level framework or 3 pillars were drawn from lessons of successful reform from around the world already. So, I mean, I think that's the relatively short answer to the question. The PIFA approach was 8 years in the making, really, of testing indicators in many countries around the world, working with countries to develop a set of performance indicators that don't measure how they do it, but the impact, I mean, what the results are. But the danger of that is the success of PIFA has suddenly led to a production factory of other governance indicators. People want governance indicators for civil service and administration, cascading indicators. I'm worried. I mean, it's a whole industry. And yeah, countries are going to be having to produce these, or somebody paid to have them produced. That is a worry. I think that'll detract from the reforms in the end of the day. So it's another point.
So thank you. And an IOU for another gift. This is actually our International Journal on Governmental Financial Management. This is, I think, the first under this new title. Used to be the Public Fund Digest.
Oh, excellent.
And we owe you a very nice ICGFM pen.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep.